So let's discuss it now with Delaware Senator Chris Coons. He sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Obviously, they will be the power players if there ever is a hearing on this. Now, he's called the GOP response to the Supreme Court vacancy elementary. Senator, thank you for joining us. Explain why you use that word.
Well, Chris, what I was saying was that the Constitution requires us to provide advice and consent when the president nominates someone for a vacancy on the Supreme Court. And for our response to be, no, we refuse to even hear from you, we refuse to do any hearing or even to meet with a nominee, that's an elementary school level response. Rather than doing our job under the Constitution, having hearings, having a vote, if the Republican majority chooses to reject President Obama's nominee, that's their prerogative. But to simply refuse to even hold a hearing, and now many Republican senators are refusing even to meet with a nominee, is, in my view, akin to slamming your door shut and saying, I refuse to even talk to you, which isn't advice and consent. We should be doing our job under the Constitution. I have called on the president to nominate someone who is a consensus candidate who would be eminently deserving of confirmation.
All right, Mitch McConnell obviously is driving the efforts of the Republicans, or lack thereof, on this particular issue. Here's what he says about what his thinking is and why.
Presidents have a right to nominate, just as the Senate has its constitutional right to provide or withhold consent. In this case, the Senate will withhold it.
Look, I don't know how many times we need to keep saying this. The Judiciary Committee has unanimously recommended to me that there be no hearings. I've said repeatedly, and I'm now confident my conference agrees, that this decision ought to be made by the next president, whoever is elected.
Now, to the extent that the Constitution is relevant here and not just typical political maneuvers, which, by the way, your party has used as well in the past, he says we have the right to advise and consent. They actually have the duty to do so under the Constitution. He also says that they have the right to withhold it. That actually is not in the Constitution. But do you think you can make a saleable case that they're doing something that violates the Constitution here, or is this just about how they choose to play politics?
I think this is an unfortunate political move to continue the obstructionism that has sadly dominated the Republican response to President Obama for the last 7 years. In the 2012 election, President Obama was elected to a 4-year term. And under the Constitution, he can and should nominate someone for the Supreme Court vacancy that's now gone on several weeks. If there is a vacancy in this key seat in the Supreme Court throughout the rest of this year, it will likely hobble the court's ability to decide a whole series of important cases on issues from affirmative action to abortion, from immigration to unions. And that would be a sad spread of the disease of obstructionism that has so seized up the Congress in its fight with the president.
But Senator, you know all this all very well, but why is it so? Why push them to do something that your party has also not wanted to do in the past? And not just anybody talking about it. Your big shots have talked this same talk. Chuck Schumer talked it in 2007. Now President, then Senator Barack Obama was in favor of the blockage that they were having in what was it, 2006. You had Biden talk about it in the early 90s. This is what out-of-power parties do in situations like this when they're close to the end of a presidential term. How is this any different?
Well, Chris, let's be clear about how it is different. This time, they're refusing to even hold a hearing, to even offer a vote, in some cases, even to meet with a nominee. Senator McConnell, in the clip you just played, misspoke. He did not hear unanimously from the Senate Judiciary Committee. He heard from his Republican side of the Judiciary Committee. And to set the record straight about what then Senator Biden did, not what he said, but what he did as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, every single Bush nominee to circuit courts and district courts in his last election year got a hearing, got a vote, and frankly, in the last century,
but not a Supreme Court justice
nominee. Every Supreme Court nominee in the last century got a hearing and got a vote, except the few who withdrew on their own.
All right, important perspective there. Thank you very much, Senator Coons, for making the case on New Day this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.